ID for those at or below the poverty level to obtain one in a Bureau of Motor Vehicles. So this argument that you're disenfranchising the inner city poor. By the way, at the Saperstein Towers in inner city Akron, 90% African American, all of them had a photo ID, except for a couple elderly veterans who didn't drive. Why? Because any government assistance or anything you do with the government, you have to have a social security card and you have to have an ID card, right? I can't even rent a carpet cleaner without a photo ID. I think we ought to require, right, the photo ID requirement. Well, anyways, thank you for indulging me tonight.
Question.
Yes.
You know, you spoke of our right to vote as a precious right. Why do politicians diminish the meaning of the vote by doing such things? Now, mind you, this is something that millions, we're told, millions of young Americans have died for to guarantee. Why do we allow the politicians to get away with things like motor voting, registering kids in the high school so they can vote on the levies, and so 18-year-old kids won't pay taxes for 10 years, some of them. And why do we let politicians get away with this stuff? Because this is a precious right. We ought to do everything we can to protect it, to make sure that our vote is treated respectfully. And yet the politicians do everything they can to diminish the meaning of the vote and extend it mindlessly to all kinds of people on all kinds of occasions. I think that we ought to be more vocal and more strict as a voting electorate to remind the politicians that they cheapen the vote when they do the things that you alluded to. We had people give their lives to protect that vote. Just a point.
Back here.
I read and saw legitimate videos a few years ago on electronic voting machine fraud. What are you going to do to protect against that, where they can just change the source code and no matter what you vote, the machine pops out 5149? Have you looked into that at all?
I know there's some folks that are looking into that. We did not venture into that with our citizens audit. One of the things that the media pressed us with that day when we gave these findings, do you believe that this would have overturned the vote in Ohio with Obama? They were looking for something sensational to say. What we were doing is saying, hey, there's a problem that exists here. We need to fix it. This wasn't a referendum on whether Mr. Obama won the state or not. What it was is a serious citizens audit to say, and really, I think it was the first one of its kind, this large, that wasn't tied to any political interest, was basically saying, we've got a problem here, we've got to fix it. And they knew that. And some of them took it to the airwaves, and some of them did not. And I was interviewed that day by Channel 10 of Columbus, for instance, one example, and it never showed up on the TV that night. And I asked the gentleman, the journalist, the next time I saw him, and he interviewed me again, because I challenged him. I said, what does it do? End up on the floor in the editing room? What goes on here? You know, the League of Women Voters gets their word out, but you're just ignoring us. And so he gives another interview. It didn't air that night either. So it's not him, it's back at the station. See, they just shut it down. Well, through the conservative media, we're able to get our message out. You know, Breitbart is one way in which we get it. The Drudge Report, the internet. And I think a lot of our young people are getting a lot more of their news from the internet these days. And it's funny because I'll sit and I'll watch Fox News now, and it takes forever for them to get to the end of the subject matter. When I go to the internet, I can just read real quick and go through all these different topics I want, right? And you know, 10 years ago we couldn't do that. You know, 15 years ago we couldn't do that. Now we can. Now I can just go through the clearinghouse and find what articles I want to read on. And then if there's really something I'm missing, you know, I'm sure the media will let me know about it. But you know, it's funny how much time you want to spend on a lost airline in the Indian Ocean. We're all, you know, it's a tragedy. It's terrible. But you know, there's a lot more news that's going on. And
I have, you know, it's such common sense as far as the photo ID. Is there a way to publicize who's balking at, who does not have the common sense and is voting against that? Is there a way for us to put boldly all over across the internet or on something to say, these are the idiots that don't have any common sense?
Well, this is a battleground. This is a battleground state. It's a great question you raised, because on that committee, which is the State Government and Policy Committee, right, with Chairman DeVilla. That's where most of this election law came from the Senate over to the House, and that's where the hearings were conducted. On that committee is State Representative John Adams, good conservative. Who's the gentleman from Delaware County? Matt Huffman's on there. Who's the gentleman from Delaware County? Brenner? Andy Brenner.
Andy Brenner.
Yeah, Andy Brenner's on there, good conservatives. On the opposite side, Mr. Gerberry, liberal from Youngstown, and Kathleen Clyde from Kent, Ohio. Kent, Ohio, they had an Obama headquarters there, by the way. And which brings me to a story of a gentleman working the polls there, and this student comes in from Kent and wants to vote in his local precinct. And she shows a student ID, and he looks at her and he says, did you vote back home? And she balked, she didn't say anything. He said, I want you to turn around and leave right now before you're convicted of a felony and I call the authorities because you're about to commit voter fraud. Well, she left. He called her out on it, okay? And I got his sworn statement, by the way, but she could have gone to another precinct and done the same thing and ended up voting, all right? That actually was hard to track down. We found double registrations of these students. But again, this is an all-volunteer citizens audit, okay? By the way, the collection box is back there. You want to help us, okay, on your way up, put something in. Actually, very serious about that because it takes time to do this. We've got some great books tonight, Prayers and Presidents. I love that we're next to James Garfield's house. One of my favorite Ohio presidents. And what did he say? What was a great quote? In a nation such as this, where the people choose their leaders, if the Congress be ignorant and reckless and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorant recklessness and corruption. Y'all should know that. You're right next door. He was a preacher, by the way. I love that too. America's God and Country. How many have this book? Encyclopedia of Quotations, Bill Fetter's book. This is a great book resource. Mr. Lynch, don't you have this book?
I just saw that today. I'm going to go buy one today.
Good. We'll take your money. This is a great book. You just got this book.
I did just get it.
Did you start reading this?
I did this afternoon.
Tell us about it.
Oh. It's letters from an Ohio farmer to take it to the
Yes.
satellite. It's a series of letters to Congress starting in 2011, I think is the first one, essentially describing the crisis in our country and trying to open a discussion about what should the limitations of our constitutional government would be. It's much like the old Federalist Papers and that kind of a tradition.
They write anonymously
Yeah, very.
to members of Congress from 2010 on. When all this was happening, when Boehner and company were trying to deal with the situation, this is really awesome writing here. Dr. Peter Schramm, the first edition, they didn't say who they were. It just said letters from Ohio Farmer. Remember, the Federalist Papers didn't want to divulge who they were, right? They were just writing under fictitious names, right? Debating how we would form this new government. They were doing it in the same vein. Dr. Peter Schramm of the Ashland University Ashbrook Center. How many know of their work there at the Ashbrook Center? Oh, and just how many heard of Hillsdale? Well, Hillsdale wouldn't even have a professor if it wasn't for Ashland, because they all are schooled at Ashland and go up to teach at Hillsdale. So get it right. My daughter's an Ashbrook scholar.
I went there.
Did you go to Ashland?
Yeah.
By the way, if you ever get a chance to go down and visit there at the Ashbrook Center, and it's one of Ohio's great secrets, isn't it? You go in there to the Ashbrook Center and you walk into the political science department. You'll see the who's who of political entities, personalities from the last 30 years who have been there and spoken to that small group of students that no more than the people that are in here tonight. Those students get really first-hand action with some real dignity. Margaret Thatcher's been there. Ronald Reagan's been there. I mean, you should see the who's who is on that. Ed Meese and all these folks that have been there. Great program. My daughter's an Ashbrook scholar. Anyways, this is a great book. It's a great read. In fact, this is the Tea Party book. And I told them, I said, send me a case of these.